Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going on a really comprehensive journey into topic number 29, English sentence structure, affirmations, questions, negations, and exclamations. Now, you might be wondering, why is this specific topic such a huge cornerstone of advanced English proficiency? Well, it's because moving from an intermediate level to true C2 level mastery means you actually have to abandon those rigid prescriptive schoolbook rules you learned early on and instead embrace descriptive syntax. We're going to map out the complete, intricate architecture of the English language. This is tailored specifically for linguistics students and anyone gearing up for advanced proficiency benchmarks, like the official language school's curriculum. So, let's dive right into this fascinating linguistic landscape.
You know, to truly master sentence structure, we have to go way beyond the rote memorization of basic grammar. Grounded in the seminal works of linguistic heavyweights like Huddleston, Quirk, and Svartvik, our exploration today is going to reveal that syntax is deeply, fundamentally connected to real-world communication. Specifically, the publication of Quirk, Greenbaum, Leach, and Svartvik's A Comprehensive Grammar of the English Language, alongside Huddleston and Pullum's frameworks, completely shifted the academic focus. They basically proved how syntactic choices actually serve communicative intent in a real discourse. As you'll see, mastering this isn't just about knowing where to drop a verb, it's about understanding how formal structures map onto, and sometimes completely contradict, their actual functions in everyday speech.
Think of this agenda as our lecture syllabus for today. We'll start with the architecture of English sentences, move into clause and element analysis, hit formal syntactic categories, explore form versus discourse function, and wrap up with a deep dive into interrogative systems.
Okay, let's open up our first section, the architecture of English sentences. From simple to multiple, let's see what actually constitutes a sentence at its most basic foundation.
So, the architecture of any sentence fundamentally depends on its clause structure. A simple sentence is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's a single, independent clause expressing one complete thought. Think of the sentence, Pauline gave Tom a digital watch for his birthday. Pretty straightforward, but natural language is rarely just simple. We also have multiple sentences, which contain one or more clauses as their immediate constituents. These can be compound sentences, built with coordinate clauses acting as equals, a process formally known as parataxis. Or they can be complex sentences, packed with subordinate clauses that totally depend on a main clause to make sense. We call that hypotaxis. Understanding whether a speaker is using parataxis or hypotaxis is absolutely crucial because it changes the whole cognitive load and rhythm of the information they're delivering. Moving progressively deeper, we arrive at Section 2, Clause and Element Analysis, the three levels of syntax.
To truly analyze these sentences, linguistic theory basically requires us to zoom in progressively, almost like adjusting a microscope. Every complex utterance can, and definitely should, be analyzed across three distinct levels. First, we have the macroscopic sentence level, looking at the sentence as one unified whole. Then we zoom into the intermediate clause level, where we examine how subordinate clauses nestle inside that larger sentence. And finally, we hit the microscopic element level, breaking those clauses down into their individual components. The vital thing to grasp here is that linguistic analysis is recursive. Elements contain clauses, and those clauses build up into the overarching sentence. That principle of recursion, it's literally what gives English its infinite generative capacity.
Now, right down at that microscopic element level, we find our interlocking puzzle pieces, the functional categories. We have the subject, which, academically speaking, isn't just the doer of the action, it's the syntactic argument dictating verb agreement. Then there's the verb, driving the state or action. The object, direct or indirect, which receives that action. The complement, which adds necessary predictive info back to the subject or object. And lastly, the adverbial, giving us that contextual framing, like time, place, or manner.
Let's look at a practical example. Take the complex sentence, "You can borrow my car if you need it." Linguistically, we actually analyze this sentence twice over. First, we look at the main clause, "You can borrow my car." Then, we zoom in on the nested subordinate clause, "if you need it." Academically, this is an adverbial clause of condition, and it functions entirely as a single adverbial adjunct to the main clause. It's a perfect, real-world example of recursion in practice, a nested structure that's the absolute hallmark of advanced English syntax.
And that brings us to Section 3, Formal Syntactic Categories, the four pillars of form. Now that we know how they're built, let's categorize them.
Syntactically speaking, English recognizes four major closed sentence types. First, declaratives, characterized by a subject generally preceding the verb.
Second, interrogatives, formally marked by an operator before the subject or an initial W element. Third, imperatives, which normally have no overt grammatical subject and just feature the base form of the verb. And fourth, exclamatives, which rigidly feature an initial phrase introduced by what or how, usually followed by a normal subject-verb order. Remember, their formal identification here relies strictly on word order and inflection. We're isolating them completely from their actual context for a second. Just check out the sharp contrast here between the interrogative and the exclamative form. Interrogatives are governed by the incredibly strict rule of subject-auxiliary inversion. Think of, did Pauline give Tom a watch? The operator physically moves in front of the subject. Exclamatives, on the other hand, rely on WH fronting, without messing with the subject-verb sequence. They stick what or how at the very beginning, but keep that standard declarative-style subject-verb order totally intact. Recognizing these strict formal markers is basically ground zero for high-level syntax analysis.
All right, now we reach the true crux of our analysis in Section 4, Form versus Discourse Function, the great mismatch.
This is where the academic study of syntax gets incredibly fascinating. Because, well, what you see on the page doesn't always match what the speaker intends to do. In theory, our 4 formal syntactic categories should align perfectly with 4 primary communicative intents. Declaratives act as statements to convey info. Interrogatives act as questions to seek info. Imperatives are directives giving commands. And exclamatives are exclamations expressing emotion. To understand this academically, we turn to John L. Austin and J.R. Searle's famous speech act theory. This theory dictates that while syntax determines the locutionary act, the literal words spoken, the discourse function represents the illocutionary force, the speaker's actual pragmatic intent. A direct match is the baseline. But the mismatches between the two, that is where true C2-level mastery lives.
So look at this brilliant mismatch right here. Take the phrase, "I'd love a cup of tea." Syntactically, formally, this is a declarative statement of fact. But socially, functionally, it's a directive. It is a hidden command asking someone else to go make you some tea. Why do we do this? Sociolinguistics gives us the answer through politeness theory, or face-saving strategies. English speakers deliberately use declarative statements as directives to soften the bluntness of an imperative. It maintains social harmony, proving that we actively manipulate syntax for social grace.
Here's another fantastic example. Isn't Christine clever? Grammatically, the operator isn't precedes the subject Christine, making it a formal interrogative through subject-auxiliary inversion. But the illocutionary force? The speaker is absolutely not seeking information here. They're hijacking an interrogative form to function as a pure exclamation. This specific structure, a negative interrogative used as an exclamation, is a wildly powerful rhetorical device. It basically assumes the listener's agreement, cornering them into a consensus rather than actually asking for their opinion. Clever, right?
Let's move into our final segment, Section 5, for a deep dive into interrogative systems, operators, and dummies.
Forming yes-no interrogatives requires a remarkably strict, almost mechanical process. Rule 1. Place the operator, the first auxiliary verb, before the subject. But wait, what if the underlying declarative sentence doesn't even have an auxiliary verb? Enter Rule 2. Do support, or do insertion. English is actually quite unique among Germanic languages because we require this weird auxiliary crutch. We literally conjure up a dummy operator, do, when no other operator is present to carry the tense or facilitate that inversion. So, you like coffee magically becomes, do you like coffee? And finally, Rule 3. The verb to be is a special exception. It acts directly as its own operator. No dummy do required. Now let's contrast that with our other category, the WH interrogatives. Unlike yes-no questions, which just want a simple binary answer, WH interrogatives expect an open, totally variable range of information. We achieve this through a really cool linguistic mechanism called WH movement, or fronting. In the deep structure of the sentence, the question word is usually generated right in the object position. But to signal the question on the surface, that WH word is forced to move to the absolute front of the sentence. By putting the word first, like how in "How are you today?" the speaker instantly signals they are seeking specific information. All right, we have covered some serious ground today. From the foundational architecture to the microscopic elements governed by recursion, the rigid formal categories, and those complex interrogative systems driven by do support and W movement. But if you take away just one thing today, let it be this. Understand the incredible gap between grammar and meaning. Syntax is not just a rigid set of textbook rules you memorize. It is a highly flexible, pragmatic toolkit that we constantly manipulate to navigate complex social realities. So as you go about your day, I challenge you to listen closely to the native speakers around you. Can you spot that invisible architecture in your own conversations? How often are basic statements actually hidden commands designed to save face? And how often are polite questions secretly powerful rhetorical exclamations? Keep your ears open and you will hear the brilliant, messy complexities of English syntax absolutely everywhere. Thanks for exploring this with me today.